Welcome to Creating a Disruption. This podcast focuses on ways to disrupt the traditional classroom setting by using evidence-based pedagogy such as active learning, collaborative learning, and experiential learning. I am your co-host, Brian Hall, Associate Professor of English and coordinator of Studio 101, which is a creative learning space at the metropolitan campus of Cuyahoga Community College. And it is the space where we are recording from today. I will turn it over to my co-host, Kara DePaul, to introduce herself before we start our conversation with today's guest. Kara?
Thank you, Brian Hall. My name is Kara DePaul, and I am the Director of Faculty Development at the college, and I also teach business classes part-time, and I'm very excited to be here with our esteemed guest today.
Awesome. Today's guest is Assistant Professor Lindsay Milam, English faculty at the metropolitan campus. Lindsay has been teaching at the college since 2004 as an adjunct and has been full-time since 2007. Including teaching, Lindsay has been the coordinator of the Metro Campus Reading and Writing Centers, and she is currently the English Department Coordinator at Metro. She is also a Bessie Award winner, which is the highest teaching award given at the college. Thank you so much for joining us, and we want to jump right into talking about your disruption. What activities do you do in the classroom, and why did you decide to create this disruption? Lindsay?
Well, thank you both so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here on your very first episode and as your first guest. And I feel lucky to be able to do this because one of the things that I really do love talking about is teaching in this particular space. And I was lucky enough to be one of the faculty who kind of piloted using the Studio 101, the creative learning classroom here at Metro. One of the first assignments I ever did in here was with an English 1020 class. It was College Composition 2. And one of the first things that I do in my classroom in 1020 is do a review of the writing process. So things that they should have learned in English 1010. And for some students, it's just been a semester. Some students, it's been a lot longer than that. And it got really boring just kind of going over, these are the steps of the writing process. This is what an essay looks like. And so I decided to create an activity here in the studio that kind of let the students take the reins. So instead of me lecturing, I brought them in here into this space, put them in groups, and then I had little slips of paper for the different parts of an essay. So an introduction, the conclusion, the body paragraphs, and then of course the essay structure as a whole. And I basically asked them to do some kind of creative representation of what that particular part of the essay looked like. So for example, the group that had thesis statements, you know, what are the important parts of the thesis statement? They were supposed to write that on their whiteboard. And then they were supposed to try to think of a creative way, like what is a thesis statement like? And I want to say that that first group all those years ago decided that for them, the thesis statement was a flashlight. It was kind of like the guiding light that would guide the rest of the essay. And so they made a little flashlight out of Legos. And what I really loved about that assignment, and what I think the students loved, is that they got a chance to get out of the classroom, and they actually got a chance to do something that was completely different than anything that they'd done before. So that was the first assignment I ever did in the studio, and it's one that I do every single semester now since.
So what was the reaction to students when they first came in that first time and they were doing it? Like, because mostly the student experience in college is usually just sort of sit down, take notes, maybe have a group discussion, and then move on. So the first time bringing them in, what was their reaction to that?
Well, I let them know right off the bat that they were guinea pigs, that this was my first time doing this as well. And I think that kind of helped them all relax because they went from, you know, a classroom where they had 4 cinder block walls and desks and tables that did not move into this space where their desks and chairs moved, the whiteboards moved. They had things that they could touch and play with, like Legos and Play-Doh and art supplies. And I will say that that very first activity did seem a little bit chaotic just because I hadn't given them enough direct instruction as to what to do. And also, they had no idea how to behave in a space where they could spread out, where they could talk to each other and interact in different ways. So it was loud. I remember that. And I also remember that students laughed a lot. And even though for me as a teacher who likes kind of organization and having a plan, that lack of structure really kind of scared me a little bit. But when I saw how much the students were enjoying it, I was like, okay, I think this can really work. And even though I've definitely tweaked that assignment from the beginning until now, it's definitely one of the more popular assignments that I do in this space. So the students, and that's one of the other things that I always do. Anytime I bring a class in this space for the first time, I do a little introduction about what the space is supposed to be about. I talk about the movable desks and chairs and whiteboards, and I invite the students to come in to this space if there are no classrooms going on, so that they can continue group work and group studying, write math theorems on the board. And I've actually seen some of my students utilize this space outside of our regular classroom hours, and that's been really cool to see.
Yeah, great.
So you talked a little bit about how the students getting together and being able to interact with each other generated a lot of laughter, which doesn't always happen in the classroom, right? Like that, and that's awesome that you can bring that out and give students the space to have that kind of experience. But can you talk about like some of the other benefits that came out of the students physically being here?
I definitely think that the students learned more because they were in control of the learning. Like, for example, that particular assignment, it wasn't me just writing notes on the board and them taking down the notes. They actually had to go into their textbook, if we had one at that point, or their class notes from maybe a previous class. So they actually had to come up with it, and then they had to teach it to the rest of the class, because that's the other thing that I forgot to mention about the assignment, is that once the students were finished creating the representation of whatever their project was, they had to show it off to the rest of the students. And so, I started off with, okay, what's the first part of an essay structure? And they said introduction. Okay, introduction group, show off your board. What are the parts of an introduction? Show off your creative project. What did you guys come up with? And so I think the students kind of they got a refresher of that very important content in English. But they also, I think, got even more confidence too, because it allowed them to take control of the learning. It definitely allowed them to get to know each other in a better way, because even icebreakers that you do on the first day of class, the students are basically just going to talk to the two people that are sitting next to them.
Right.
But in this particular case, and I try to do this when I'm in the room, I try to mix up the groups a little bit so that the students are working with different people almost every time. So it definitely created like a little bit of a classroom community, and it certainly helped the students, I feel, learn that content or review that content a lot better than it would have been if I'd just written notes on the board.
So you mentioned the first time, and a little chaotic.
Yes.
For you as a teacher, how were you nervous? Were you apprehensive about trying an assignment in a space like this? And then how did you sort of move beyond that if you were? Because I know a lot of times, going from my own experience in college and graduate school, we teach the way that we've been taught, which is take notes, take your quiz, write your paper, and move on. So doing something that's out of the ordinary like that, how did you handle it? How did you feel about it? If you're nervous about it, how did you overcome that? How did you deal with the chaos, Lindsay?
I was really nervous. The first semester that we used this room, I used it for both my English 1010 classes and my English 1020 classes, and I used assignments or content that I had always felt comfortable delivering in a classroom, so that I felt like that would give me a little bit more control over what that day's activity would be. And I tried not to let that nervousness show to my students, even though I did tell them, that they were my guinea pigs. But then I started to enjoy that experience. Like I said, watching the students laugh, watching them blow me away with their creativity. I mean, even though I've done this particular assignment dozens of times now in the studio, there's always at least one group that looks at a conclusion, in a different way than anybody's ever looked at that before. And so I feel like seeing the students really kind of dive into it has been the most fun part for me. And I'll definitely admit that when I debut a new activity in the studio, I'm always nervous about how that's going to go. Because there have been some times where I realized that I didn't do a good enough job preparing the students for what they were doing, or the instructions that I handed out on the piece of paper weren't as clear as I thought they were. And that confusion can really kind of stall that creativity and the originality that tends to go on in a space like this. So I really, you can't do it all, right? So I try to anticipate what questions the students might have, or make sure that I go over the instructions and think, did I cover everything? This is step 1. What's going to go on during step 1? This is step 2. Did I make sure that everything is clear for the students? And I think that's helped a lot.
Yeah. Do you let the students know when you're debuting a new assignment and tell them that you're a little nervous about it, or you're like, I'm just trying this out and we'll see how it goes? Or do you go in there with full confidence to say, look, we've been doing this, I've been doing this forever, this is going to work?
I usually tell the students it was the first time after we've completed the assignment. Basically because then I guess I have an excuse if it crashes and burns. And I don't think I've ever had an unsuccessful time in the studio. I've definitely had challenges and things where I was surprised by the way the students took the assignment. But I feel like in some way, shape, or form, the assignments that I've done in here have usually always worked in some way. And the students' feedback, and that's something that I always do, I reserve the last 5 minutes of that particular class to get their perspective. I said, what worked? What didn't work? If I do this again in the future, how should I do it to make it better? And the students always have really good constructive feedback that I take and use it to tweak my assignments. And then at the end of the semester, I always do a student feedback form. And one of the questions that I have on the rate portion is, did you enjoy the days in the studio? And 100% of the time, students say they loved being in this space. They loved doing something a little bit differently. And most of the time, they'll finger those particular class sessions as their favorite ones of the semester.
Are they usually pretty quick to give you feedback? Like when you ask how this day went, will they raise their hand and tell you exactly how they felt like the assignment went and the day went?
Yeah, they really are. And, sometimes it's never the quiet ones, which we know happens in a traditional classroom space anyway. But the ones who are a little bit more outgoing, and I hate to use the word more seasoned or mature students, but the students who are a little bit older, who I think are the most surprised about the difference in learning, they're usually the ones who will raise their hands right away and be like, I really love this aspect, or, hey, your instruction here just really didn't work. So they give me, I think, the best feedback of all of it. So,
do you have anybody who is resistant to trying it? Because they really just want that traditional experience. I just want to sit here and take notes. I don't want to be bothered. And so when they come into a space like this one, or they're asked to play with Legos or use Play-Doh, that they're like, this isn't college.
I've never had anyone refuse to participate. I've definitely had students who are hesitant. And I usually try to partner those kinds of students with the ones that are a little bit more outgoing, the ones that do tend to kind of roll with the punches. I will have to say that sometimes the students who are the most hesitant are the younger students, like the CCP students, because they really have done nothing like this before. And for a lot of them, high school learning has been just sitting there taking notes so that they can ace a test or write a paper. So those are usually my students that are the slowest to jump into it. But then when they see the rest of the class enjoying themselves, they'll usually be okay with it as well. Even though I said I've never had anybody refuse, I did have one student, and this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was definitely before the pandemic, where on his end of the semester feedback sheet, he did say that he didn't want as many days in the studio as we had. He felt we were in here too much, which I just thought was kind of funny because if I have a class that meets twice a week for an entire semester, I'm usually in here maybe 5 or 6 times. So to me, that doesn't seem like a lot, but for him, that was like too much fun time, if we want to use that word, fun. But so I did have one student who just never took to it like the rest of my students have.
Mm-hmm.
So you would split the time between a traditional classroom at the Metro campus, and then you would have 5 or 6 designated days here. So how did you plan out like what days that you were going to be in the studio, and how did you reserve that? How did you make that work with your course schedule?
I try really hard before a semester begins to have every day planned out. I'm that teacher, and I know that that's something that I really have to work on, is being more flexible as an educator. And so when I know, for instance, that I have certain activities that go with certain units that we're doing, like for example, in English 1010, they write an evaluation or a review essay, and I come in here and they actually review English 1010 students' review essay. So I call it reviewing a review essay. And so on those particular days, I can reserve the studio ahead of time. If you go on my Tri-C space, there's a link, and you just fill out the information in the form, and it's actually really easy to do. And I've even had times where days that I've wanted have already been taken by other faculty members, and I've been able to kind of work with them and say, hey, do you mind if I switch this day with you? And I've always been able to work out those things. One of the other really great things about the studio for any faculty who may be interested in the future is that if you come to campus one day and you just have this brainstorm idea of something that you want to try during that class that day, there is a sign-up sheet on the windows outside of the Studio 101 doors. And you can actually, as long as nobody else has reserved the space, you can go in and write your name. So that way at 11 o'clock a.m. on that Wednesday, you and your students can come into the studio and you can do this brainstormed activity that you just thought of the night before. And that's actually happened to me, I think, twice. I remember thinking, I really want to try this activity in the studio. I've normally done it in the classroom, but maybe I can make it work like this. And I wrote my name up on the sheet and I came in, and those were definitely the ones that usually are the most chaotic, because I haven't had a lot of time to percolate with it, to have thinking it all the way through, but sometimes those have been the most fun that I've had.
So you mentioned that you're that teacher that plans every day. So
Yes.
Tell us, does every day go as planned?
No, and I should know that by now.
I think we all have the best of intentions, right? We all get in those situations where we plan the class, we know exactly what we want to happen, but like how do you kind of reflect back on like any changes you wanted to make, or how do you reflect on the class that day? Do you talk with other faculty? Do you talk to yourself in the car?
I think I do both. And it's interesting because, and we all know that this happens, right? You can have an activity or a lesson that you do in one class, like at 10 a.m., and then you go teach your 6 p.m. class, and it completely falls differently than it did in that 10 o'clock class. And so sometimes the self-reflection is, was it just that particular group of students? Or the time of day, were they hungry and that's why they weren't as into it as the morning class was. But I do ask for feedback from other faculty. I know Brian has been the recipient of some of my why didn't this work moments, and he's been very helpful with trying to figure out how to make it a little bit better. Our former reading specialist, Brenda Bichella, was just amazing at helping me try to figure out different steps. I'm going to miss her now that she's moved away to Florida, but I think that there are a lot of faculty, especially here at Metro, that have been my go-tos throughout the year. And I've also found that sometimes when I say to faculty how much fun my students are having in the studio, or how something worked or didn't work, then that's also given them the impetus to try something in here too. So hopefully we'll have even more faculty that get a chance to be in here in the future.
I would say that those conversations with me are always energizing.
Yes.
I like talking through assignments and looking at what's being done.
Yeah.
Especially talking about some of your stuff, because I know I've incorporated into my classes as well, because I'm able to see the level of engagement that students have. On that note, I'm going to show some images. Those of you just listening, I'll do my best to explain what's happening in the pictures. And I just want you to talk through a little bit about sort of what we see.
Yeah.
And if this is sort of like normal within your classes, especially when you're engaging in more active learning strategies. So for the first one, those listening, students are at dry erase boards. Looks like one student, there's two main boards, student at each one. You have a couple students sitting, looking. One student is writing something. The other one looks like, I'll say enthusiastically pointing.
Yes.
But I cannot be sure of the emotion behind that pointing.
Yes.
So when was this image taken, and is this sort of what you see with these types of activities?
Yes. That image was actually taken in the fall of 2021, so this past fall. And it was a very small English 1020 class, which is why you don't see a lot of bodies in the chairs.
I just thought they were all outside the picture.
I wish. No, this particular class only had a cap of 12 because at that point I was scheduled in a smaller classroom, and so I only had 12 students total, which on the one hand was really great, but on the other hand was a little bit frustrating because, with a smaller group, how do you divide those people into groups so often? So for this particular assignment, they were working on, I believe, they're forming their research papers at the time. And so what I had them do was I gave them a little slip of paper or a little card that had a big controversial topic on it. So like homelessness, school dress code, that kind of thing. And then they had to decide how to narrow that topic down. And this is something that they ultimately would have to do for their research papers. So that particular group, I believe, had the homelessness topic. And that one is usually such a challenge because how can you argue about homelessness? Students when they see a topic like that, they either say something is good or bad. So I'm like, well, you can't argue that being homeless is a good thing. So how do you make that into an argumentative topic? And I remember this group specifically because they chose to go in a very different direction. They went from the bigger, broader topic of homelessness, and they narrowed it down to an argument of, should children of homeless families be put into the foster care system? Which was such an interesting topic because then they could do research about, how many children does this affect? How does that affect families when children are homeless versus when they're placed with other family members or into the foster care system? And the gentleman who's pointing enthusiastically, that actually ended up being his research paper topic for that semester. So it came from that particular activity. And this is one that I have used not consistently every semester, but for this particular class, they really they did like to talk, which was kind of fun. Even though they were a smaller class, they were very engaged. Even in our regular classroom, they would participate a lot and ask really great questions. And so I figured that this activity would work well with them because it gave them an opportunity to start thinking about how to take a broad topic, how to narrow it down, and then they actually had to go a little bit further and do a quick little brainstorm, like pros and cons, depending upon what their thesis statement might be. And like I said, that particular gentleman decided he wanted to run with it, and he did a really nice job on that paper. So that's what's going on in that particular picture.
Now I'm just going to jump down because this is what I commonly see, especially in your classes when the students are working on an assignment or activity. I know this is from really early on in your work in the studio. And I know that I don't think this is the writing process one.
No, it's not. That one is one that I do near the end of the semester for English 1020, and they write a proposal paper. That was, I believe, the first semester of the studio, so that one was my guinea pig class. And at that point, they'd been in the studio at least 4 times. And for that particular assignment, what they are asked to do is they have to, as a group, come up with a problem at Tri-C, either Tri-C, the college, or just Metro campus. And then they have to brainstorm a way to solve that problem, because their proposal paper is not just writing about the problem, but proposing a solution to that problem. And then they actually had to build their solution. So I want to say that that particular class or that particular group was working on building a parking garage out of popsicle sticks and Legos and whatever they could do. Because, at that point, pre-pandemic, parking really was an issue here at Metro. If you had a class between the hours of 9 and 2, you had to get here early to get a space, and if not, you were walking from, the parking lot underneath I-77. And so the students were like, let's build a parking garage. And so they decided that they would actually build that structure. And then if they, for example, would choose that particular topic to write their paper about, they would have to do the research. Like, how much would that cost? How much time would it take? What about human effort? How would they go about getting the approval to build a parking garage at the Metro campus? Where would they put it? So all of those things have to be researched and then written about, so that ultimately their goal, their proposal, is to convince, probably at that time it was Dr. Michael Scope, if I were to take this to our campus president, how would you best convince him to build a parking garage at Metro?
And so the image, I forgot to do, the students around a red table, Legos, Play-Doh, they seem to be sculpting
something.
Items. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, is this the something that they created, or is this another group? So this is popsicle sticks held together by Play-Doh with a tag underneath it that says Tri-C Student Parking Pass.
Yeah, I believe that's the same group. And at that time that we did this activity, parking tags weren't a thing yet. You still had to feed quarters to get out of the parking lots at
those
Tri-C.
were the days when you had to search for money to get out.
Right. You'd have like a little cup in your center console and have to dig through for the quarters. So the students decided that instead of quarters, they would pay to have a parking pass every semester. And even though I don't think this is one of the projects that I ended up presenting, because sometimes if I were having a conversation with one of our administrative leaders here, I would say, oh, hey, my students had a really great idea about this. I don't think I ever talked to anybody about building a parking garage at Metro, because I knew it would probably never happen. But it is very interesting that now we do have parking passes for faculty, but that we don't have the quarter exit system anymore. So
yeah, so those are interesting things. Now, do you feel like with the students, because they're engaging in something, I mean, this is a different aspect of the writing process, you're being creative, for these particular papers, do you feel it helps to jumpstart the students in sort of thinking through what it would be just by the act of doing?
Yeah, I really do. Because sometimes, and I know this even happens with me, right? We've all been there where we have a paper due and we procrastinate and we wait until the night before, and then we just kind of throw words on a page and turn it in and hope it's good enough. And I'm cognizant, and I can definitely read that when my students turn in those kinds of papers. But because we do these kinds of activities usually a week to 2 weeks before they turn in the final draft of a paper, this helps with those first like inventing ideas, brainstorming, pre-writing, gathering information. And so sometimes, like I said, with the gentleman who ended up doing the homelessness for his research paper topic, that helped him find the topic for his paper. And then he took the work that they'd done in the studio that day and built upon it. So I feel like it really does help students kind of sometimes not just getting an idea for a paper, but kind of completing some of those first steps that they probably would brush off if they procrastinated and waited until the last minute.
Yeah.
I would think it'd be beneficial, like even for faculty or other staff to come in and go through that same process, right? Like we think about the problems at the college, and a lot of times it's putting the words to paper of, what's the problem, what's the solution, but to take the time to create and talk through it with other people in the room, I would think would be very beneficial to a lot of folks at the college.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know that sometimes the space has been reserved by mostly campus leaders for different reasons, but I definitely think this would be a great space for not just students, but also faculty and administration to kind of dig deep and try to figure out something to help our students.
Yeah, and it also helps students understand collaboration in the workplace, right? I think sometimes in the college classroom, it's like, I just have to get this done without recognizing that we're part of a community, and many times we have to work together to figure out an idea, solve a problem, work on a project. So it provides maybe a more relaxed environment to introduce students to something like that. And even these assignments provide that opportunity to work together in a way that ends up being meaningful, because they can use it for whatever assignment that they happen to be working on.
Right.
Are you learning about any new teaching strategies that you're thinking about implementing this year, or ones that you just might be thinking about that eventually I might get around to that? And if so, what is it?
I actually, it's not going to be new, but it's something that I've done in the past that I would love to bring back. And it's actually one of the things I do that has nothing to do with the studio. So it still creates a disruption in the classroom.
Well, that's all we need is a disruption.
Okay. so it works. Before the pandemic, I would take my students to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives, which luckily is housed here at the Metro campus. And for my English 1020 paper, where I do a literary analysis, I have them analyze the lyrics of protest music. And right about the time that we were using Just Mercy as our common read book, that's when I got the idea to reach out to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives and see if I could bring my students in, because here's this resource we have on our campus. A lot of students don't even know it. They definitely don't know that as Tri-C students they get free tickets to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like, they think that's so cool when they learn that. But I wanted to show them that there's different kinds of academic research out there. It's not just writing a research paper. These people that they were going to meet are curators and music librarians. And how cool of a job is that you actually get to be a music librarian, right? And touch Michael Jackson's sequined glove and hold LL Cool J's notebook, where he wrote a lot of lyrics to his songs. And so I got the name of one of the curators at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's archives, and she said, "Oh yeah, our librarian, Laura Maidens, is actually coming up with a database of protest music songs for Just Mercy." And she said, "I think this will work really well with the project that you're talking to me about. Let's set a day." And so I did, and I went and took my students over to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the archives, and they were able to meet Laura and Anastasia and learn a little bit about what they do. And then they just browsed the collection. And for some of them, that included picking the protest song that they were going to write about. They found a really cool Rolling Stone article about that particular song. And right before the pandemic, I was working with Laura on a scavenger hunt that would take place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives. So it wouldn't just be kind of the students wandering around. They would actually have specific goals for that particular class and that particular day. And then COVID happened that semester, and I was never able to try it. And these past few years, they have not been open to the public again. And then, like so many of the industries around here, their staff was decimated. So I tried to reach out to Anastasia. I'm not sure if she works there anymore. She hadn't returned my emails. So my hope is that this coming fall semester, I'll be able to get back in there and actually try that disruption where the students are going to do a scavenger hunt in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and archives. So.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it happens, let me know how it goes.
I will. I've got my fingers crossed. So.
I love a good scavenger hunt.
Yes.
I would come and participate in your scavenger hunt.
Okay, I'll let you know if it happens. I'll invite you, and yeah, you can come be a part of the class that day.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Milam, for being in our very first episode of Creating a Disruption. Not only did we hear a lot of the things that you're doing in the classroom, and by the way, why you clearly deserve the Bessie Award for what you do in the classroom and your innovative approaches, But we'll also mention some of the things that we have on our campus to take advantage of, such as the Rock and Roll Archives. And any way that you can get students out of the classroom to learn, I think it just really helps them to become more curious individuals. And at the end of the day, we want them to learn our content, but we want them to keep learning as well. So thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. I've enjoyed this time so much. It's just so good to kind of be back in a space and talking about teaching with the two of you. This is the highlight of my day. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Likewise, it's a pleasure learning from you, Lindsay, and from being able to kind of incorporate things or think of like new ideas and new ways that other disciplines could be using the space and using some of the resources. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And for those of you listening, I hope you're inspired to create your own disruption. Thank you very much.